Okay, so now we're going to be looking at section 2 of the listening test. This is sort of a classic IELTS thing where you've got a summary. You're going to be listening to a tour guide give you information about tourist location. You've got to first be listening along and filling in the keywords from the information they give you. We've then got a multiple choice. Okay, and then we've got some typed answer. Okay, so you're going to be looking at a map, listening to where they describe things are on the map, and then writing in the correct answers. Okay, so the first thing I always recommend for students, of course, use the time they give you to read through the summary and take a guess at what you kind of think might logically go in the space. So the first sentence I'm looking at, I'm going, the salt plain is really a very large dry lake something. Now, if your vocabulary is good enough, you know sort of words that tend to go together in word families. I'm like, what could possibly come after lake? A very large dry lake, shore, lake side, lake something. But in my head, I'm like, it's probably going to be bed. Lake bed means that it's the bottom of a lake. And I just know that from my general knowledge. I'm like, a salt plain is a large dry lake bed. So I'm thinking that's probably going to be the answer. So I would just make a note of that as I'm reading through. The tourists will be staying the night in accommodation that is something meters above sea level. Okay, so you've got a blank before meters. So I know that this is number 12 is probably going to be some kind of number. Okay, so I'm already predicting that I need to listen for a number that they're going to give me, and that's going to be part of my answer to question 12. And then the place is now a desert with little rain, but with all of the salt remaining. When it rains, the water looks like a, okay, and then I'm not sure what could go in 13. It's going to be a simile of some kind, I guess. When it rains, the water looks like an ocean, looks like a moon. I don't know. Something's going to go in 13, okay? So I've already kind of got an idea of what I'm listening for. All right, so let's listen and have a look at questions 11 to 13.
I'll start with a few facts about this vast salt plain, how it was formed, and what you can find here, and so on, and then we'll take a look at our handy map and mark a few of the places we'll be visiting on our tour. Let's start at the beginning. What we usually call the salt plain or salt flats is actually a huge dry lake bed. The lake was formed along with the Pateo Mountains. As they were pushed up from the Earth's crust, the lake was lifted along with them. That's why we are at such a high elevation, 3,400 meters above sea levels here in the town, and we spend one night in a hotel at 4,100 meters. On that same day, you can, but you don't have to, hike to the top of a volcano at 5,100 meters. In any case, as this lake dried out over thousands of years, it left behind all of the salt that had been in the water. Because it settled out the water, the salt lays perfectly flat on the ground. This can make for some interesting optical illusions, which we'll get to later. Now, this place is a desert with very little rain. When we do have rain, we get some beautiful effects from the water sitting on such a flat surface. It basically turns into a mirror reflecting the sky. What do local people do here, you ask?
Okay, so as we were listening through, she gave us our answer. So question 11 was bed. It was like I guessed, okay? And that makes it easier. If you're revising your vocabulary, if you're doing a lot of extra reading, that's really going to help you not only in your reading, not only in your writing, but also in your listening too, okay? So I always recommend to my students, just in your free time when you're studying, buy some National Geographic magazines or go on their website and just read National Geographic articles, because that's where they pull a lot of the IELTS kind of information from. And so being familiar with stuff about sort of nature and the environment is going to be helpful, because a lot of the sort of general information they give you in reading or in listening is related to that kind of thing. So just from my general knowledge about geography, I'm like, it's probably going to be lake bed. Okay, so I always recommend to my students, go on the National Geographic website and read through that, because that's really going to help you. You might just get lucky in cases like this where it's just something that you've read and you know about in general knowledge. Okay, for question 12, they tried to trick us by giving us 3 different numbers, okay? So I personally don't like taking notes as I go through or writing down everything that they say. I like trying to be kind of listening only for the specific information that I need. The only thing I regularly write down as they're going through is numbers, because I find it hard to remember numbers. So I try, if they mention a number, I just take a note of it. That's something you can practice a lot. Just get very good at writing down any number that's given to you quickly in quick succession. So they tried to trick us. They gave us 3 numbers. The keywords they're saying, tourists will be staying in accommodation. Okay, that's our keyword. So she said, this is the elevation of the lake bed. this is the elevation of the hotel, and this is the elevation of the mountain we're going to be climbing, okay? So our keyword here was that we're going to be staying the night in accommodation that is 4,100 meters, okay, above sea level. So you had 3 numbers, you got a sort of 1 in 3 chance of writing down the right one in your IELTS question, but the keyword there was hotel and accommodation. Okay, and then at the end, she sort of talks about what the water looks like. When it rains, the water looks like A, and then the answer was mirror. You can see that she says, when we do have rain, we get some beautiful effects from the water sitting on such a flat surface. It basically turns into a mirror reflecting the sky. Okay, so this is the sort of trickier side of it, where the sentence really is a summary of what she's saying, and it doesn't really follow the same structure of what she's saying in the sentence. So it's kind of tricky. But you know here that it's going to be looking, the water looks like A, and so it's going to be a noun that goes here, right? The water looks like a bath, the water looks like a something, okay? And then we also know from the rules of grammar that it's going to be a plus a consonant, right? It's not going to be an something, it can't be an umbrella, an ocean, okay? So we know it's going to probably start with a consonant sound. So that helps you pick out from what she said that the water looks like a mirror. All right, let's move on to the next section. Well, we've got to be doing multiple choice. So we're looking for, first off, which 2 things can salt be used for? We're looking for things useful, or, you know, what local people do with it. What can salt be done with? What can salt be used for? Like, how is it useful? Those kind of things. And then we're also looking for, in this one, there's 2 phrases that are going to be correct. Okay, so we've got tourist should, tourist should, things to have, things to bring, things to wear. Okay. So this is going to be a case of circling and crossing things off as the tour guide speaks, and trying to follow along with what she says.
Apart from working in the relatively new tourist industry, this area is well known for mining. To begin with, there's the obvious: salt. This place holds around 8 billion tonnes of salt, and 24,000 tonnes is extracted and sold each year. All that salt isn't just for cooking and eating, though. It also holds lithium, an element essential for batteries which power all our modern electronic devices, and possibly even the cars of the future. Because approximately 55% of the world's lithium can be found here, the government has set up giant extraction facilities here to get at some of that valuable resource. Speaking of valuable resources, there is also a huge silver mine near here, but it's not really a part of the salt plains, and if you want to visit there, you'll have to go on a different excursion.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at.
Okay, so they went through questions 14 and 15. So they tried to trick you by talking about mining, but that's not something salt can be used for. That's where does salt come from? She said we've got a lot of mines around here, so they tried to trick you into picking mines because you just panicked and heard the keyword. Which, if you're going for the high levels, you should be able to resist that panic and follow along with what she's saying. So the first part, she says, all that salt isn't just for cooking and eating, though. Okay, so what is something salt can be used for? It's used for cooking. Okay, and then she also says it also holds lithium, an essential element for the batteries which power all our modern electronic devices. Okay, so she says that in salt they have this thing called lithium, and which is an essential element for batteries. Okay, so it's essential for batteries. We use salt to make batteries. Okay, so and then she says batteries which power sort of, you know, modern electronic devices. So modern electronic devices would be incorrect because they don't make electronic devices. They make the batteries which then power electronic devices. Okay, so she's talking about cooking and she's talking about making batteries. All right, then let's move on to 16 to 17 when we're listening to what tourists should do. We're listening for the 2 things that are correct here. And then we need to be filling in these things on the map, okay? So again, it's about being able to follow directions. You should be comfortable with your north, south, east, and west, close to, above, just next to, you know, those kind of things, what you need to be listening for.
Look at questions rapidly between.
Now, listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Let's move on to the things you might expect to see and do during your tour. A little information for you first. The climate here can be quite harsh due to the altitude and lack of precipitation. Temperatures will change rapidly between day and night, dropping by as much as 20 degrees Celsius. There's not such a drastic change in temperature between seasons here. The seasons here go from wet to dry, and that's what we call them. The climate here means that visitors need to be careful about how they dress and what they bring out onto the salt plain. First, it's a good idea to dress in layers. Wearing different types of clothing, say jacket, jumper, t-shirt, helps you control your temperature. You also must make sure you bring some water, sun cream, and lip balm so you can be ready for the environment. Now, you might think this place would be pretty inhospitable to life, but there are some very interesting living things here. We'll start with the plants. There is an island, well, a big rock, out in the salt flat where you can find an ancient forest of cacti. Some are over 1,000 years old, and it's one of the tour's most popular sites. And, even though this is not a great place for land critters, plenty of birds can be found here. 3 different kinds of flamingos stop here in the wet season, and there are about 70 more feathered species to be found locally. If you have a look at the map I provided you, I'll go through some of the locations we'll get to. Of course, we'll start down here in the town of Pateo.
Okay, so she's moved on to the map question. So just to quickly recap which 2 are correct, okay? So she was trying to be quite tricky there, and by only sort of mentioning what tourists should bring kind of once. So it's almost like you're trying to eliminate what things she said not to bring, okay? So you can see in D, she didn't mention sunglasses, so that's probably incorrect. She didn't mention bringing a camera, so that's going to be incorrect. And even though she mentioned t-shirts, the first thing she said is layers, okay? So the first thing I was thinking of, it's going to be B or C because she talks about layers. But she didn't mention a camera. She talked about water. So I said, okay, it's probably going to be C because she said wear layers and bring water. Then the other thing she mentioned is to water. And then she mentioned sunscreen, which is another form of sun protection, sun cream, things to stop you getting sunburnt. So I was like, okay, she mentioned layers, water, and kind of sun protection or sunscreen. Okay, so that's why the answers are C and E are the 2 correct ones. Okay, because the others contain things that she didn't talk about. All right, so that was kind of a tricky one. They're trying to catch you out on that. But that's the case where I would probably, as I was listening to that, be sort of like ticking or crossing off things that she mentioned as she was talking along to try and help you out to answer that. So then she says, okay, we're going to look at the map. So she says we're starting in Pateo Town, so that's good. So when I was listening, I would probably circle Pateo Town just to remind myself this is where we're starting from, and then I can orientate myself north, south, east, or west, depending on how she describes it.
Not far to the east, but a bit north, is a massive silver mine I mentioned earlier, the 5th largest in the world, and the first place we visit. Speaking of mining, we can find the salt mining area just to the north of the silver mine, where quite a few of the locals still make their living. Next, we'll visit the mining museum, to the west of the salt mines. Just south of that, there is the village, where they process the salt, and where you can buy a few souvenirs. Some of the people there have become very good at carving figurines from the hard salt. The tour will then move to the far north of the plain, where we will see a dormant volcano, very popular with hikers and bird watchers. We then travel to the middle of the salt flat to see the so-called Bird Island, where we will stop for a meal. It has the name Bird Island because of the wide variety of birds that nest there.
Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. We've got 3 things that are missing. So there's only so many options that she can talk about, okay? So we start in Pateo Town, and then she said north, and then she said east, where she said silver mines. I'm like, okay, so first we've got east, we've got silver mine. And then the next thing she talked about, she tried to be a little bit confusing, where she was like, here's a salt mine, and then you go a little bit like west. And I thought she was going to village, but then she was talking about the mining museum. So I was like, well, this says village here, so obviously the mining museum is going to be 19 below it. Then we go up to the volcano, and then she says in the middle of the salt flat is going to be Bird Island. Okay, so I was like, okay, that's going to be pretty straightforward. Okay, again, this is important to make sure you're able to spell words correctly. This is something, again, you've got to practice as you go through your writing, and if possible to do writing, and if you have a teacher who's able to check your spelling when you do your written practice, that's going to help you a lot. I know a lot of people rely on things like Grammarly, or they rely on things like spell check on Word to help them, but it's really helpful if you keep a list of words that you often spell incorrectly, and then focus on practicing that as part of your IELTS preparation too. Okay, so that was section 2. And that was a couple of different types of question. Okay, I quite like map questions. I think you're lucky if you get one because they're kind of easy to fill out. The trickiest one I think was 16 and 17, but overall that should be fine.